The growl came up out of the drainage cut while my hands were still on the slop barrow, and it was not a sound any animal on Hollis Verge knew how to make. It rolled through the ground first and the air second, the way thunder does when the storm is sitting right on top of you, and I stood there at the lip of the cut at midnight with 60 liters of kitchen waste and nowhere sensible to put my feet. I was 61 years old. I had cooked for soldiers for 30 of those years and for refugees for the last 2, and in all that time I had learned exactly one thing worth repeating. When something in the dark sounds hungry, you find out what it eats before you find out what it wants, so I looked. That was the whole of my courage that night, and I want that understood from the start. I did not climb down, I did not stand tall. I leaned over the edge of a concrete storm channel with a hand lamp shaking in my fist, and the light went down 8 feet of stained ferrocrete and landed on a wing. It was the size of the mess tent, bigger. The membrane was torn in 3 places I could count, and more I couldn't, and the leading edge of it was folded wrong, the way a man's arm folds wrong when the bone inside has stopped doing its job. The wing was attached to a body that filled the channel wall to wall for 20 meters, slate gray scale gone dull with mud and blood, ridged along the spine like weathered rock, and at the end of all of it, a head the length of my serving counter turned toward my little light and opened one eye. The eye was gold and it was dying. I have ladled soup into 10,000 faces at mile 9 and I know what dying looks like by now. It is not dramatic. It is a kind of arithmetic behind the eyes, the body counting what's left and coming up short. That eye did the arithmetic on me, decided I was not worth the fire it would cost, and started to close. The barrow was still in my hands. That is my only explanation for what happened next, and it is not much of one. The cut ran past the camp's burn pit, and I had hauled the night's waste out the wire gate the way I did every night the incinerator was down. Boiled over grain mash, root peelings. The fat skimmed off 400 liters of broth, 2 crates of protein brick the resupply had delivered, cracked and weeping, and the medic wouldn't certify. 40 kilos of it easy. I looked at a creature that could have swallowed the barrow and me together, and I did the arithmetic myself, and then I tipped the whole load over the edge of the cut. It hit the ferrocrete in front of that long gray head, with a slap that sounded obscene. The quiet. The eye came open again. For a moment nothing in the channel moved, and the wind off the flats carried the smell of fat and mashed down into the dark, and I watched the nostrils at the end of that great head flare once, twice. Then the dragon ate. There is no gentler word for it, and it does not deserve one. The jaw came around and took the pile in 3 passes, ferrocrete grit and all, and the throat worked like a cargo winch. And partway through it, a sound came out of the animal that I have thought about every day since. Not a growl. Lower than that and broken in the middle. The sound a furnace makes when you feed it after it has burned down too far, when the draft catches and the whole flue shudders. Relief if relief weighed 9 tons. The lamp on the perimeter tower swung its long white finger out across the flats while the dragon was still swallowing, and I dropped flat on the lip of the cut like the old soldier I never quite was. The beam passed a meter over my back. It passed over the channel too and found nothing, because the channel was 8 feet deep and the dragon had been living in it or dying in it long, enough to know to hold still. We lay there together, the 2 of us, while the light went by, a 61-year-old cook in a grease apron and a war, dragon the size of a dropship, and when the beam moved on I heard the breath go out of him in a long rattling hiss, and I understood that he had been afraid of the light too, and something in my chest turned over and has never turned back. I got up, took my empty barrow, and walked the half-kilometer to the wire gate with my heart going like a spoon in a tin pot. Behind me, down in the cut, the furnace sound came again, very low. I chose to believe it meant thank you. At my age you are allowed to choose what things mean. Mile 9 was asleep when I came through the gate, which is to say it was coughing and murmuring and crying in 200 tents instead of moving. Around between them. The camp sat on the dry flats 9 miles out from the burned shell of Carverton, which is how it got its name and all the imagination that went into it. 1,100 souls that month. Farmers and millwrights and shopkeepers from up and down the Carvin Vale, every one of them bombed or burned or marched off their land in the clan war that had gone through the valley 18 months back like a scythe. Through standing wheat, the Syndral host on one side, the Mergen on the other, 2 dragon nations settling a grievance older than human spaceflight, and our farms underneath them the whole time like dropped bread under a bar. Fight. Nobody at Mile 9 had been killed by a human in that war. I want that on the record. Every grave in our little cemetery, and there were enough of them, was dug because something with wings had had an argument with something else with wings. So when I say that hiding a war dragon in the storm channel 400 meters from the wire was a hanging matter in the court of camp opinion, I am understating it the way a man understates the depth of the hole he is standing in. Etta Voss caught me at the kitchen tent before I had even racked the barrow. Etta was the camp warden, 50-some, built like a fence post and about as easy to move, and she had run a grain depot before the war and never stopped running one in her head. She held up her slate where the waste transfer weights lived. Burn pit log says you tipped 42 kilos, she said. Pit crew says the pit's empty. Incinerator crew came by with the early cart, I said. Took it for the methane digester. The lie came out of me smooth as ladling, and I am not proud of how little it cost. 30 years of army kitchens teach a man to keep his face still while the numbers behind it dance. Etta looked at me a long moment. Digester's been down a week, Tobias. Then somebody's running it off the books, and good luck to them, I said, and racked the barrow, and went to bed with my pulse banging in my ears like a loose pot lid. I lay on my cot and did not sleep, and I will tell you what I thought about, because it matters for everything that came after. I did not think about the danger much. I thought about a transport in the Esker campaign, 30 years gone, when I was a young mess sergeant and we took on a deck of enemy prisoners after their carrier broke up. Boys, most of them. The official ration for prisoners in transit was a number some accountant had written in an office that had never smelled a burned deck. I cooked past the number. Nobody ordered me to, and one officer suggested loudly that I stop, and I kept doing it, because the only thing I have ever known for certain in this life is that you feed what is starving and sort the politics after. They court-martialed men for less in that war. Me, they just never promoted again, which both of us agreed was a fair price. The dragon in the cut was starving. The rest, I decided somewhere around the third hour of not sleeping, was politics. The next night I went out with the slop run early, and under the slop I had a stockpot lid loaded with what I could honestly call salvage. The broth fat again, the cracked protein bricks, bones from the ration cases that I'd have boiled twice anyway, and one thing that was not salvage at all, which was 4 liters of the actual soup, the good barley and root I had made for the line that day, carried in a sealed tin that had ridden out the war with me since Esker. If you are going to feed it something with your name in it. That is not a rule anybody taught me. I made it up that night, and I have kept it since. He was where I had left him, which frightened me more than finding him had. A healthy animal moves. He had dragged himself maybe 10 meters up the channel to where a service ladder hung off the wall, and his head lay against the bottom rung, like he had looked up the ladder at the world and decided against it. The torn wing was spread along the channel floor, and in the lamplight I could see the fever shivering the membrane, a tremble like wind on a tent fly, except there was no wind down in the cut. I tipped the slop down first, and he ate it the same way as before. 3 passes and the winch sound in the throat. Then I did the foolish thing, which by then I had been planning all day with the deliberateness of a man who knows the thing is foolish and has decided to be that kind of fool. I climbed down the service ladder with the soup tin roped to my belt. Standing on the channel floor changed the arithmetic considerably. From above he had been big, from beside him he was geography. The shoulder nearest me rose over my head like a shed roof, each scale on it the size of my 2 hands, and the heat that came off him in waves was wrong. Too much of it. The wasteful heat of a body burning itself to stay ahead of an infection. The smell was wood smoke and hot iron, and underneath it the Swedish rot smell every cook and every medic knows, the one that means somewhere on this animal there is a wound losing its argument. I unsealed the tin and poured the soup out slow into the upturned curve of a scale plate that had cracked off his flank and lay on the ferrocrete, like a serving dish the war had thoughtfully provided. The head came around along the channel floor, dragging, and the gold eye fixed on me from a meter away, and I stood there holding my empty tin the way a man holds his hat. "It's barley," I said. My voice came out steadier than it had any right to. "There's marrow stock in it. It'll sit easy. The rest of you can fight me on the seasoning, but the fever wants salt, and I'd know." He looked at me for a long moment. That great head, the crest behind his jaw broken and notched with old scars laid over older ones, and along the heavy plate of his cheek I saw something I did not understand yet. A brand, palm of my hand square, that had been burned over. Not scarred in battle. Burned deliberately, and then burned again crosswise by somebody who had wanted the first mark gone. Then he dipped his jaw and drank the soup out of the broken scale with a delicacy that made my eyes sting. The way you'd see a big man take a teacup off his grandmother, and when it was done he laid the head back down on the ferrocrete with his nostrils a hand's breadth from my boots and breathed "Why?" The word came up out of him like gravel coming up a chute, trade tong, shaped strange by a mouth never meant for it, and I confess my legs nearly went. Knowing a thing can speak and hearing it ask you a question by lamplight are 2 different weights, and the second one is heavier. I thought about the answer longer than I have thought about most answers in my life, because I had the feeling, standing in that cold channel with my empty tin, that it was being weighed somewhere above my pay grade. "Because you're hungry," I said finally. Man doesn't need a better reason than that. Never met a better reason than that. The gold eye held me a moment longer. Then it closed, and the breath went long and slow, and a dragon of the Syndral host slept with his nose at the boots of a refugee cook, and I climbed the ladder and walked home under the perimeter lights, and that is how it began. Not with destiny, with barley and a tin, and a question I answered honestly because I was too old and too tired to answer it any other way. By the fourth night we had a routine, and routines are how I have survived everything that has ever happened to me. Slop at the top of the cut for the bulk of him, the tin of proper soup down at the bottom for whatever in him was still a person, and me standing by the broken scale plate while he drank, talking. I talked because the silence in that channel had a weight to it that wanted moving, and because a fevered body does better with a voice nearby. Ask any night nurse. I told him about the kitchen, the ration ledger, the 1,100 mouths, the resupply schedule that ran late the way rivers run downhill. He listened the way mountains listen. Now and then the gravel voice came up with a word or two. More, once, when the tin ran dry in salt, another night, which I chose to take as a compliment to the stock and not a request to season me. On the fifth night he told me his name, and I learned what it cost him to say it. Kavash, he said, while the fever shiver walked his wing in the lamplight. And then, after a silence long enough that I had started rinsing the tin, say it to no one. The name is owed places. If it is heard, the owing comes here. Toby's, I said. Toby's realm. Mine's not owed anywhere. You can wear it out as you like. The eye came around at that, and something moved in it that was not fever. I know amusement when I see it, even 9 tons of it. Tobias, he said, trying the weight of it, the way you try a strange coin between your teeth. A small name. Small names keep, I said. Ask any potato. He made a sound I had not heard before, 3 short rolls of stone deep in the chest, and it took me until I was halfway up the ladder to understand that I had heard a war dragon laugh. I sat on my cot that night and grinned at the tent canvas like a fool, 61 years old, and the grin died slowly as the other thought came in behind it, the one with the ledger in its hand. Because here is what I was carrying by night 5, and I will set it out plain the way Etta would have. Camp rations ran on a 14-day resupply that arrived on day 16 as often as not. My margin, kitchen salvage, the cracked crates, the boiled twice bones, was the difference between thin weeks and bad ones, and I was tipping that margin into a storm channel every midnight. The soup in the tin was my own portion, which is between me and my belt and is nobody's business. But the salvage was the camp's, and the camp was 1,100 people whose faces came past my ladle every day, and the arithmetic behind my eyes had started keeping 2 sets of books, and any cook who tells you he can do that forever has never run a kitchen in a famine. Pia caught me on the 7th night. I should have known she would. She was the only one in that whole camp more interested in my kitchen than I was. Pia Ostrek, 17, sharp as a boning knife, had walked out of the Vale fire carrying her little brother and nothing else, and I had given her work at the serving line a year back because hands that age need somewhere to be. She had a gift I never taught her, which was reading a kitchen the way bookkeepers read a page. And she was standing inside the wire gate at midnight with her arms crossed when I came, back with the empty barrow, and she said, 40 kilos of waste, 4 trips a week, and the burn pit hasn't smelled of anything in days. So either you found a hole that eats, or you're trading camp food to the scaver crews, and I came out to find out which, because one of those I'd help you with, and the other I'd stop you. The scavers were the loose crews that picked the war wreckage out on the flats, and being accused of feeding them stung worse than the truth would, which is the only excuse I have for what I did, which was tell her the truth standing right there at the wire. All of it. The cut, the wing, the soup, the name I did not say. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, show me. And I want it written somewhere permanent that she did not say, are you mad? And she did not say it'll eat you. And she did not say, what is it worth, to keep my mouth shut. A girl who had lost her whole world to dragonfire said, show me. And that is the kind of people I fed at mile 9. And I will hear no words against them as long as I live. She stood at the top of the cut with her knuckles white on the rail of the service ladder and looked down at 20 meters of war dragon for the better part of a minute. Kavash looked back up at her, very still, the way he had been still under the perimeter light. Neither of them blinked, far as I could tell. His wing's wrong, she said finally. Not it's huge, not we're dead. His wing's wrong. Storm took the cut last spring 2 meters deep, she said on the walk back. Already 3 problems ahead of me, which is where she lived. If it rains up valley, he drowns in that channel like a cat in a rain barrel. And that smells an infection, and you know it, and soup won't fight that. And the medic tent inventories antiseptic by the bottle, so. She stopped and looked at me with her jaw set. I'll fix the inventory problem. You figure out the rain. I want to be careful here, because this is the part of the story where a man telling it kindly to himself would say we borrowed the antiseptic. We did not borrow it. Pia traded for it with her own kit, her mother's ring, the one thing that had come through the fire on her hand, to a medic's assistant named Saul, Breck, who asked no questions out loud but asked them all with his eyebrows. 4 bottles of veterinary-grade antiseptic concentrate logged as breakage. I found out about the ring 2 days later and went to buy it back, and it was already gone on the supply truck, sold up the line. I have bought that girl 3 rings since with my wages after, when there were wages and an after. She wears them all and says the arithmetic came out ahead. The cost went in the books anyway, the set I keep behind my eyes, and that page does not balance and never will. Cleaning the wound was an education in scale. The worst of it was where the wing root met the shoulder, a tear long as my arm, where something had gone in and been pulled back out, and the flesh around it had the hot, proud swollen look that every cook who has missed a burn knows on his own skin. Kavash laid the wing open along the channel floor and held it there while I went at the wound with antiseptic and a long-handled basting brush, and I will tell you what holding still cost him, because he would not. Every pass of the brush, the whole channel length of him went rigid, scale-grinding ferrocrete, and the breath came through his teeth in a thin hiss with firelight flickering down in the throat of it, 2 meters from my head. One twitch of that shoulder would have painted me on the wall, and we both did our arithmetic, and neither of us said the number out loud. "You have done this before," he said once while I worked. "There is no shake in your hands. Pulled shrapnel out of a mess cook on the Esker run with a filleting knife and a pan of boiled wine," I said. Hans learned then that shaking's a luxury. Anyway, you're better behaved than he was. He bit a man. The furnace rolled low. Laughter again, with the hiss still in it. What became of him? Lived 40 more years and complained through all of them. Cooks are hard to kill. It's the steam. Cures us like hams. It went like that, those nights. I would work and talk nonsense, and he would hold his great body still as masonry, and somewhere in the middle of it the talk stopped being nonsense. He asked about the camp, and not idly. He asked the way a quartermaster asks. How many? How fed? How warmed with the cold months coming? Who guarded us? And when I laughed and said 1 tower lamp and a wire fence that would slow down a determined goat, he was silent a long time. And the silence had a flavor I could not name yet. And once on the 11th night, with the fever finally breaking and his eye clearer than I had seen it, he turned the gold of it on me and asked, "The ones in your camp?" They were under the sky when the host crossed the veil. It was not really a question. Most of them, I said, I came after. But most of them, yes. Carverton, the mill towns, the river farms. And you know what I am. I know you're a soldier of one side of it, I said. Saw the brand. Saw it's been burned over too. And I don't know what that means, and I'm not asking. The head sank a little lower against the ferrocrete. It means, he said, and stopped. The longest I ever heard him hunt for trade-tongue words. It means the owing I spoke of. It means you are feeding a thing that fell. The eye closed. If your people knew what slept in their drain, Tobias' realm, they would be right to bring fire. That is all I will give you tonight, and it is more than is safe for you to hold. I rinsed the tin and roped it to my belt and stood there a moment in the lamplight, looking at the burned-over brand, big as my palm, on a cheek plate big as a door. 18 months I had been ladling soup into the faces of what Dragon War leaves behind. I had buried children at mile 9. The sensible voice in me, the one that sounds like an officer, said the girl traded her mother's ring for this animal's life, and you have tipped 100 meals down this hole, and you do not even know what it did. Same time tomorrow is what I said out loud. It's bean day. The beans want longer than the barley, so I'll be late, and I'll hear no complaints about it. And the furnace sound followed me up the ladder, low and broken in the middle, the sound of a thing that has been fed past its number, and politics could wait another night. They had waited 30 years for me already. Up top, the perimeter lamp swung its white finger across the flats, and I lay flat in the dust until it passed, and walked home with the empty tin knocking at my hip like a slow bell. The rain came on the 15th night, and it came the way everything came to the Carven Vale that year, which is to say all at once and owing no one an apology. Pia woke me with a hand on my shoulder and a weather flag in her fist. The Up Valley storm pennant the camp office flew off the water tower, and she did not say I told you so, but she stood there saying it with her whole face while I got my boots on. Channel takes the runoff from the whole east slope, she said. He's got 2 hours maybe. We had picked the place a week before, because Pia's 3 problems ahead head had made me walk the flats with her in daylight like 2 fools botanizing. Substation 12, the agricultural depot on the old Carverton Road, 800 meters from the cut, shelled in the war's first month. Roof folded down over the grain shed at one end like a hat brim over an ear, and under that fold a space long and dark and dry enough to garage a dragon, if the dragon could get there, and if nobody was watching the flats while he did. The storm took care of the watching. It knocked the camp generator sideways inside the first half hour, and the perimeter lamp died, and the whole world went to roaring black water and lightning. We went out through the wire and oilskins with 2 hand lamps between us, and I will not pretend to remember that half-kilometer except in flashes, the mud pulling my boots, Pia's lamp swinging, and then the lip of the cut and the light going down into it, and finding him already standing the first time I had seen it, 20 meters of dragon-braced leg to leg in a meter of brown water that was rising while we watched. The ruined wing held up out of the flood like a man holding a broken arm above a crowd. Getting him up the service ramp at the channel's end was 20 minutes as aged a year apiece for. The wounded shoulder would not take his weight on the climb. He went down twice, and the second time the whole channel boomed with it, and the water sheeted over his back. And I stood at the top of the ramp in the rain, yelling down into the dark like a madman. No words even, just my voice, here, here, here. And I will tell you what got him up that ramp, because I have turned it over many nights since. It was not strength. He had been 100 days starving, and the strength was gone. He looked up through the rain at 2 small human lamps, and something in him decided it would not die in a drain while they watched. And he came up the ramp on 3 legs and his chin, scales shrieking on wet ferrocrete, and stood swaying on the flat with the lightning mapping him white against the dark, and Pia, 17, 4'11" in wet boots, walked to his front foot and put her hand flat on his ankle, high as she could reach, and shouted up through the rain, 800 meters. You can be tired after. He could not be tired after, as it happened, because of Hannock. We were 100 meters short of substation 12, all 3 of us staggering, when the lightning came down somewhere near and lit the flats end to end, and there at the cemetery fence stood Aldous Hannock with a shovel in his hand and a storm lantern at his feet, out at 2 in the morning shoring the drainage trench around the graves the way he did every hard rain, because his boy was in the 3rd row, and Hannock did not let water stand on his boy. And the light hung there a full white second, plenty long enough for an old miller to see a war dragon walking across his world a stone's throw from his son's grave, with the camp cook walking at its shoulder. Nobody moved. The thunder came and went and left the rain hissing. Kavash moved first, and what he did was go down. Not a stumble, I knew his stumbles by then. He folded his legs deliberately and lowered all 20 meters of himself into the mud, neck flat along the ground, wings hugged in, until the great gold eye was as near the earth as it could be put, and he held still the way he had held still under the perimeter light, the way I understood now he could hold still forever if stillness was what was owed. A creature that had filled the sky over this valley laid himself in the mud before a man with a shovel, and the rain beat on both of them, and I walked into the lantern light between them with my hands out and empty and the words coming before I had chosen them. Aldous. He's hurt, and he's done, and I'm feeding him. That's the whole of it. You want it out loud at assembly, that's your right, and I won't dodge it. But it's pouring, and he's not going anywhere but that shed, and neither am I. Hannock looked at me a long time. The lantern hissed against the rain. He was past 70, Hannock, and the war had taken the mill that 6 generations of his name had run, and the son who would have been the 7th, and every line of his face was full of water that I do not think was all rain. Gray, he said finally, which I did not understand. His voice came out rusted. Big gray, crest all notched. He was not talking to me. He was looking past me at the eye in the mud, and his fist was opening and closing on the shovel haft. I know this one. I seen this one. And then he turned around and picked up his lantern and walked back toward the wire, shovel on his shoulder, an old man alone in the rain, and over his shoulder, nearly lost in the weather, came the words, "Get it under cover, fool. Lightning finds a thing that size." We got him under cover. The folded roof of the grain shed took him the way a hand takes a coin, close and dark and dry, and he lay in the old grain dust with the storm hammering the buckled tin overhead, and was asleep between one breath and the next. The first sleep I ever saw him take all the way down, fathoms down, the sleep of a soldier who has finally been ordered off the wall. Pia and I wrung ourselves out by the door and watched the rain wash the channel we had pulled him from, brown water at the brim now, going past like a freight line. She said nothing for a while. Then, "He'd have stood in that all night rather than knock on our wire." "Yes," I said. "Why?" "I thought about the burned brand, and the owing, and you are feeding a thing that fell." "Because he thinks he's owed nothing," I said. "Less than nothing. He thinks he's in debt to the rain." For 3 days I waited for Hannock to put it at assembly, and for 3 days the old man said nothing, met my eye at the soup line like always, held out his bowl like always. On the 4th day I came out to substation 12 at midnight, and there was a barrow standing by the shed door in the moonlight, a mill barrow, loaded with sprouted grain. The camp seed stock spoilage from the flooded store tent, written off that morning, no good to anyone now. On top of the grain sat a mill weight, the little brass kind, to hold a scrap out of sack paper down against the wind. Nothing written on the paper, There was no need. I stood there in the cold with my throat working, and behind me in the dark of the shed the furnace sound rolled low, and I swear it had a question in it. "It's from a man whose boy you people buried," I said, not turning around. "He's telling you to eat. Don't ask me to explain it, because I can't, except that this is what they're like, the ones I cook for. They have buried everything they had, and they are still the kind that leaves the barrow. After Hannock, it spread the way warmth spreads in a cold room, slow, from the near bodies outward, and never once the way I had feared. Pia told her little brother because he had followed her one night and there was no helping it, and the boy told no one, but he began collecting bones from the ration cases in a sack he labeled "Dog" in letters big enough to fool nobody. Saul Breck came out to see what his 4 bottles of breakage were dressing, stood in the shed door with his medic's bag in his hand and his jaw somewhere around his collarbone, and then rolled up his sleeves and spent 2 hours at the shoulder wound and left muttering about tissue structure and never billed anyone. Mara Joss, who had sewn canvas for the fishing fleet before the war, made her a seamstress of shrouds and tent patches, was brought in when the wing membrane wanted closing, and she went up a stepladder with a sailmaker's needle and wax cord and worked along the tiers all of one long night, tent canvas backing on the worst of them, while Kavash held the wings spread and shook with the effort of stillness and never once pulled away. The wing would not fly again. Saul said it quietly in the doorway, and I watched the gold eye take that sentence the way ground takes a shell, the long stillness after, and the wing folding back against the great body slow and careful, like a man putting away a letter he will not read again. It was not mine anyway. Kavash said into the silence which none of us understood yet. By the first frost there were 9 of us in what Pia called, straight-faced, the supper club, and the strangest part of those weeks is that it was not strange. The most natural thing in the world, it turned out, the way the worst-burned people in the Vale came 1 and 2 at a time under that folded roof, stand near the thing that had burned them. Old Senna Marsh, who lost the river farm, came and looked at him a long while and then said to me, perfectly matter-of-fact, "Ours was the white-crested kind, the Mergen. This one fought those," and went home and came back the next week with a rendered drum of pig fat for the wound dressings. They sorted his war for him. The people of Mile 9 sorted him into the ledger of that valley with a fairness no tribunal could have managed, and they fed what was starving and saved the politics for after. And I stood at my kettle through those weeks, understanding that I had not taught my camp anything at all. They had been mine all along, or I had been theirs. It was Hannock, in the end, who asked the question I had been swallowing for a month. He asked it on a cold, clear night with 5 of us in the shed and the lamp turned low. Asked it standing square in front of that great notched head, an old man with his cap in his hands and his voice rusted shut and forced open. The last night of the burning. The river road out of Carverton, full of us, 2,000 on foot, and the fire line coming down the east bank straight for the crossing. His hands strangled the cap, and a gray came down between. Crest all notched like yours, stood the road, turned the fire up the empty bank instead, and took it across the wings to do it, and I have wondered 18 months whether I dreamed you. His voice went to nothing and came back. My boy was already gone by then, but my daughter-in-law was on that road and her girls. So you'll tell me, soldier, was it you on the river road? Or do I owe that to a dead one? And in the lamplight, the great head came down level with the old man, slow the way it had come down in the mud, and Kavash, vow champion of the 3rd wing of the Syndral host, said the first thing about the war he had ever said in that shed. You owe it to no one. It was not a gift. It was the only order I ever refused, and it came 11 towns too late. He told it to all of us then, in the low lamp with the frost ticking on the tin overhead, and he told it like a soldier reporting, no color in it, which is how you tell the things that have all their color on the inside. He had been the vow champion of the 3rd wing. The words mean little in trade tongue, and he did not try hard to dress them, but I have cooked for armies, and I could read the shape. The first blade, the oath holder, the one who flies the point of the formation and carries the host's honor on his own hide. The brand on his cheek had been the vow mark given before 1,000 wings when he was young. For 60 years he had carried it through the host's wars. And the host wars were old and cold and fought over things humans never saw, nesting, ranges, sky roads, the bones of dead volcanoes rich in whatever dragons hold rich. The Namergan grievance came to the Carven Vale, because the Vale's river cliffs were a nesting prize 7 dragon generations old, and the fact that humans had built a colony of farms under that sky in the meantime figured in the war councils of both hosts, he said, roughly as much as the weather. We were told the ground people would shelter when wise things shelter, he said. Some war thinkers argued your towns gave the Mergen cover and provender, and so were lawful to burn. I carried those orders the first weeks. I did not question them. The eye was open, fixed on the lamp flame, and nobody in that shed breathed aloud. Champion is not a thinking post. The vow is obedience. I had kept it 60 years, and it had kept me, and a thing you have carried 60 years, you no longer feel the weight of. Then came the last night of the burning, and the East Bank fire line, and below the crossing I saw the road full, and the order in my ears was the same order as all the other nights. A long silence, the frost ticked. I have hunted for the why of it since, and I will not lie to you by making it noble. It was not your faces. I was too high to see faces. It was that the road looked like a thing spilled. Like a pot gone over, all down the dark, everything someone had, running out along the ground. And I had been fed from pots when I was small, in the creche calves by the old ones. That is all the why there ever was. The vow weighed 60 years and the spilled pot weighed more, and I broke formation and stood the road and turned the fire up the empty bank. And my own wing brothers came down on me for it, as the vow demands they must. Your own, Pia said. Her voice cracked on it. As the vow demands, he said again level. I bested two and would not kill them, and the third opened my shoulder and my wing, and the battle moved west and left me falling. What you found in your drain is what fell. The eye closed. One came back, Dorhetz, who flew my left for 30 years. I was down in the riverbed and could not rise, and the law is plain. A champion who breaks the vow is unmade before the host, and his mark is taken with fire. Dorhetz looked at me a long time. Then he burned the mark over himself, there in the riverbed, crosswise, the erasing stroke. So any who found the body would find a nameless deserter and not a fallen champion, and the host's honor would not bleed. And he went back and reported the vow champion dead in the river, and the host keened me. And somewhere in the high cold my name is carved among the honored dead. The breath went out of him long, the furnace banked low. He did it for mercy and for the host both. But understand what it made me. Dead, I am their honor. Alive, I am their shame-walking. There is no third thing I can be to them. So the name is owed Tobias, as I told you. If the Sindrel learn that Kavash lives lame, grounded, fed by the hands his war broke, they will not see kindness. They will see their dead champion kept like a yard animal at a human camp, and 1,000 years of vow law will tell them the shame must be burned clean. They are not cruel. They are old, and the law is old, and you are all very small under it. That is why I crawled to a drain and not a door. The lamp hissed. Outside, far off, a dog barked at the cold. Hannick put his cap back on his head, and his voice had rust in it still, but it came out flat and certain. Then they were fools to keen you, he said. Buried the only one worth digging up. And he stumped out into the dark, and that was the supper club's verdict entered into the record, and no appeal was ever filed. I would like to say the winter went gently after that, but winters at Mile 9 did not go gently, and this is the part of the story where the costs come due in a column, so I will give them the way Etta would. The resupply ran 3 days late, then 6. The ration cut came down from the colonial office in Verge City the first week of frost, 1,100 mouths recounted as 900, rations equivalents by a formula no one who wrote it ever ate from, and I stood at my kettle making soup thinner and lying to it about flavor, and the salvage that had once been margin was now arithmetic with faces on it, and the slop barrel got lighter, and I lay awake doing sums. Kavash solved half of it himself. The night he smelled the kettle going thin, he began to hunt. Not flying, he would never fly. We all knew the sentence even if no one repeated it. But a war dragon on foot in the wreck-strewn dark of the Vale is still the top of every food chain that walks, and the flats had gone feral with the war. Hog runs gone wild down the river bottoms. Scaled six-legged grazers the colony books called ferrant elk multiplying through the burned farmland with nothing left to hunt them. He went out lame in the dark and came back before light, and at the shed door there would be carcasses laid out neat as a butcher's window, field-dressed by talons that could thread a needle when they chose. The first morning it was 2 wild hogs. By midwinter he was provisioning the camp's stew pots with a quarter of their meat, and nobody at the assembly meetings could work out why the cooks' salvage traps had gotten so lucky, and my soup stopped lying, and 1,100 people went through the cold with marrow in the broth, fed by the fire that had burned them, and only 9 of us knew the shape of the grace being said over that. Etta Voss made 10. She came to me in the kitchen tent in the dead of winter with her slate in her hand, and she did not ask a question, because Etta never spent words asking what she could spend silence confirming. She set the slate down. On it was the waste transfer ledger going back to the autumn, every load, every weight, a red mark on each one, and below it the trap meat intake column with its impossible totals, and below that, in her square hand, 1 line of arithmetic. A 400-kilo predator eats 1.5% of body weight daily at rest. She had even shown her work. I looked at it a long time, then at her. Knew by the 3rd week, she said, ran a depot through a war, Tobias. You think I can't smell a quiet requisition? She took the slate back, wiped it clean with her sleeve, and stood there with her fence post face on. And what she said next, she said carefully, like she was setting a weight down without a sound. Camp warden can't know about this, so I'm telling you what the camp warden would do if she knew. She'd report a feral predator displacing toward the camp, which is true, and request the garrison schedule a sweep, which they'd take all winter to get to. And meanwhile, she'd want the camp stores accounted clean, which they are. I checked. She paused at the tent flap. My grandfather kept draft oxen, she said, which appeared to be a complete thought, and left, and from that week the kitchen's salvage ledger acquired a new line item, winter provision, MISC, signed EV, and I understood that the conspiracy now ran the camp. The garrison came anyway in the first thaw. Not for him, a routine census sweep, the Colonial 6th out of Verge City, one lieutenant and a squad and a clipboard, but routine is only routine until it walks somewhere wrong, and the sweep's path ran out the old Carverton Road past Substation 12. I got the word from Pia's little brother at a dead run an hour ahead, and that hour took 10 years off me that I want acknowledged. There was no moving him in daylight. There was no hiding 20 meters of dragon under a hat. What there was, it turned out, was Etta Voss, who met the lieutenant at the wire with the census rolls and a found problem in the water allocation, paperwork that was 3 hours deep and entirely her own invention, and Hannock, who waylaid the squad's corporal to show him war damage at the cemetery fence in the exact opposite direction, and by the time the sweep reached the substation the light was going, and the lieutenant wanted his supper. And a folded grain shed roof at dusk is just a shadow among shadows if every local guide you have walks past it bored. They billeted the night and left in the morning, and I sweated through both like a man with a fever. The scavers came in the last hard month of winter, and they came in daylight, which was how I knew the luck had started to thin. I was on the morning salvage run when I crested the rise by the old road and found 3 of them at the substation's south fence with a tarp load of war wreckage on a sledge and no good reason to be standing still. Their crew boss was a man called Rilk, lean as a fence wire, who had sold the camp engine parts twice and bad fuel once, and he was crouched over the frozen mud inside the fence line with his head cocked, reading. I did not have to walk close to know what he was reading. The thaw and freeze had taken the prints and fired them like pottery, four-toed, wide as a washtub, going down toward the river bottoms in a line even a town child could follow. Big feral denning out here, we think, I said. Coming up loud and easy, a man with nowhere particular to be. Garrison's been told, I'd keep your crew clear of the structures. It took a hog off us whole last month. Didn't leave the squeal, that's so. Rilk stood, unhurried, and his eyes went over my shoulder to the barrow I was wheeling, which held, under sacking, 40 kilos of perfectly inexplicable kitchen waste 500 meters from any burn pit. He smiled with most of his teeth. Dangerous country cook. Man hauling supper to a thing that eats hogs whole. He'd want that kept quiet, I expect. Quiet's dear this winter. Everything's dear this winter. I have haggled in worse markets than that frozen fence line, and I will spare you the back and forth. It cost me a sack of protein brick and a promise of 2 more at the next resupply, and we both knew what we were buying, and neither of us said the word. And he put 2 fingers to his cap like an honest man and took his crew south, and I stood watching the sledge go with my breath smoking, and the certain knowledge sitting in me, cold as the morning, that I had not bought silence. You cannot buy silence from a man who sells information. You can only buy a head start, and you rarely learn how long the start is until you hear what's behind you. I told Etta that night. She moved the protein bricks in the ledger without a word and wrote beside them, in her square hand, insurance, lapsed, and that was the truest line of bookkeeping ever entered at mile 9. For a camp is a small town and small towns leak, and Rilk's head start ran out the way head starts do. Scavers sold information the way they sold salvage, to whoever weighed out, and there were 2 markets in the Vale that paid for word of a living war dragon. One market wore colonial uniforms and sat in Verge City. The other market was the sky, and in the last week of winter the sky began to pay attention. Kavash knew it first. Of course he knew it first. I came out with the tin on a clear, hard night and found him not in the shed but standing full height in the dark beside it, head up, absolutely still, the way a man stands when he is listening to a sound below the sound. I stood next to his foreleg and heard nothing at all, and that was when I noticed the night had gone wrong. No dogs, no windbirds off the flats, the whole Vale holding its breath. Hi, he said at last, very low, the gravel barely turning. 2, riding the cold river of air that runs over the east ridge, where the ground cannot hear the wings. The great head came down slowly, and the gold eye found me, and for the first time since the drain I saw the arithmetic in it again, the badiklikining what was left. Syndrel Sky Scouts, Tobias. The host has heard something. They're drawing the search squares, and the squares are getting smaller. The scouts came back 4 nights later, lower, and this time even I could feel it, not hear, feel. A pressure that crossed the stars east to west and put every dog in mile 9 under the cots. In the morning there were marks on the high bluff over the river, Kavash said, talon scrapes renewed on old waystones. Sky signs left for other wings. Search continues. He read them from 2 kilometers distance the way I'd read a chalkboard menu, and then he came back into the shed and lay down, and was silent in a way I had learned to dread. The masonry stillness, the decision stillness. He announced it that night to the whole supper club, formally, with his head raised off the floor and the old command coming back into the gravel, like iron filing standing up when the magnet passes underneath. I will go east tonight, on foot, down the river bottoms, away from this camp. I am strong enough now to walk a long way, and to be found a long way off, and when they find me, the shame will stand a day's flight from your wire and your kettles, and the law will burn what it burns, and your people will never enter the account. This is owed, and it is the last good use of me, and I will hear no argument. And the gold eyes swept us, daring it well. He had been a champion of the Syndral host for 60 years, and they are an old and terrible people, and the voice could have backed a fleet off a coastline. But he had never chaired a Mile 9 assembly meeting, and we were the worst burned and least impressed people on Hollis Verge, and the silence that followed lasted just long enough for Hannock to take his cap off. No, said Hannock. That's the argument, said Pia. He summarized it, said Saul. I had the tin with me. I set it down by the broken scale plate we still used as a dish, and I poured it out, barley and marrow, steam going up into the cold of the shed, and I am told my hands did not shake, which is the steam curing me again, because inside I was nothing but shake. Eat first, I said. Nobody makes a good decision hungry, and nobody walks east on my watch with an empty hold. And while you eat, you can hear the case against, because there is one, and you've earned it plain instead of sentimental. He looked at me. The steam went up between us. He ate, 60 years of vow law in him, and he could no more refuse my tin by then than I could lift him, and I gave him the case against while the lamp hissed. You say they'll find you a day east and the account closes there. Walk it through like a quartermaster, not a martyr. They find a lame champion fed through a winter. Fed by whom? You're 100 days past starving and your wounds are dressed and stitched with sailmaker's cord, and you think a host that reads talon scratch off a waystone at 2 kilometers won't read tent canvas sewn into your wing. They'll have the whole story off your hide in one pass, same as I'd taste a stranger's stock and name his bones. And then they're a day east with the shame's accomplices a day west, and you not there to stand between. I let that sit. The eye had gone very still. You want to carry the burning away from us. But you are not carrying the thing they'll burn for. We are. It's stitched into you, Kavash. We're stitched into you. There is no walking east with that. The silence went long. The steam died off the scale plate. When he spoke, the iron was gone out of the gravel, and what was left was older and very tired. Then there is no road at all. There's one, I said. Same road I've been walking since the night the slop went over the edge. They come, and they find what is actually here. Not a champion kept like a yard animal. Not a shame. A soldier who fell doing the one thing his whole vow was too small for, and the people he fell for, feeding him back to life because that is what people are for. We stand in our own doorway and we tell the truth of it. You keep saying their law is old. Well, the truth's older. We'll see which one of them the Ash Mother's been flying under all these years. I did not know when I said it that I had used her name, the name the Vale's refugees used around the cook fires for the Syndral War matriarch, the one who had commanded the host through the burning. Sevozara, the Ash Mother, whom nobody at Mile 9 had ever seen closer than a shape over the east ridge like weather coming. Kavash's head came up when the word crossed, and something moved behind the gold that I had no ladder to reach. You do not know what you are saying, he said softly. She gave the vow mark into my cheek herself before 1,000 wings. If the host comes, she comes, and you mean to meet her at your wire with a soup ladle and the truth. I mean to meet her the way I've met everything since I was 19, I said. On my feet, by my kettle, with the day's count honest, it has worked on every terror they've sent me yet. Generals, auditors, hunger you. I am too old to learn a second method now, and the furnace rolled, helpless, the 3 low stones of it, and the meeting voted, insofar as the supper club ever voted, by Hannock putting his cap back on, and the matter was settled over the champion's objection, 10 small mammals and their dragon all in. What there was to do we did in the 5 days the sky gave us. I will not pretend any of it would have stopped one angry wing for 1 minute. That was never the point. The point was the same as a clean apron at inspection, which is that how you are found is a language, and we meant to be found saying something. Saul changed the dressings fresh. Mara went back up the stepladder and finished the long seam she had been saving until the membrane strengthened, so the wing, flightless or not, folded clean and proud against his side instead of dragging. Pia and her brother curried the winter mud out of his scale, with yard brooms until the slate gray came up almost silver along the ridges. The boy working the places Pia called to him, both of them stone serious, a dragon of the Syndral host being groomed for review by two orphans with brooms, and Kavash holding so still, so carefully still, that I had to take my eyes elsewhere and inventory the stores twice. And on the last night, he called me out to the shed alone and gave me the scale. He took it from his own breast, hooked one talon under a plate the size of a serving tray at the center of his chest where the keel bone runs, and drew it out the way you draw a feather, with a small exact violence that made me wince, and he laid it in my two hands still warm. It was the deep gray going to bronze at the root, heavier than it had a right to be, and down its center, raised in the living material of it, ran a mark, not the burned-over brand. A clean mark, older, grown into the scale itself over 60 years the way grain grows into wood. The vow mark, whole where no fire had ever been able to reach it, because no fire is given leave to touch a champion's breast while the heart behind it still runs. The cheek is the host's, he said low. They marked it, they burned it, that is theirs to do. The breast scale is mine. It is the one place the vow lives that no law can unmake, and a champion gives it once, and to one, and it is not given for love, Tobias, so wipe your face. It is given as testimony. If wing law comes ahead of me, if I am dead in the first minute and you are standing in the smoke with your camp behind you, you hold that up, and you say these words in trade tongue, and you say them loud, because every dragon of the host will know them. He taught me the words. They were 7 words long, and I said them back to him 11 times in the cold with my breath steaming until the gravel pronounced me fit for service. And I have never written them down, and I never will. They were not given for that. The plain sense of them in our tongue was, the vow is kept where it fell. And what will it do? I asked hoarse. It will buy 1 minute of stillness, he said. Whatever stands in front of the host when those words are heard, the host must look at it. Truly look, as the law looks. 1 minute. The great head came down until the gold eye was level with my face, close as the first night, and the heat of him came around me in the cold like a room. It took you one tipped barrow to turn me, and I am the stubbornest thing this host ever forged. Make your minute count, cook. I came back through the wire at 4 in the morning with a dragon's heart scale wrapped in flour sacking under my arm, and Etta Voss was standing at the kitchen tent in her nightcoat with a message flimsy in her hand, and I knew the shape of trouble by the way she stood holding it, like a thing that ticked. Garrison signal traffic, she said. Came through the camp office relay tonight in clear they didn't even trouble to code it. Scaver report, paid and logged, large feral draconiform, grounded, denning at the agricultural substation, Mile 9 district. She looked up at me over the flimsy. Colonial 6th has cut new orders. Sweep and destroy Tobias. Armor column and air support out of Verge City. Her voice stayed depot flat, but the paper trembled once. 2 days, Etta called the full assembly at first light. And that was her finest hour as a warden, and I will fight the man who says otherwise. 1,100 people in the cold on the assembly ground, and she stood on the ration platform with her slate and told them all of it, flat as a manifest. The dragon in the substation, who had been feeding it, and how long, what it was, what it had done on the river road, what was coming out of the east, and what was coming up from the south, and the order those things were likely to arrive in. She hid nothing and softened nothing, and when the crowd's noise rose, she let it run exactly as long as it needed and not 1 second more, and then she said the thing I will remember her by. Every one of you is free to take the south road today, and the camp will provision any that go. I'll say what I'm doing. I'm staying with the stores. I've run from this war once, and I ran on a road that a lame dragon paid for, same as half of you, and I find I'm out of running. Then she stepped down off the platform and opened the morning's count as if it were any morning, because the sermon Etta Voss ever preached was procedure held steady. 41 people took the south road, most with small children, and not a soul blamed them, and I packed every one of them a double ration and stood at the wire until the dust settled behind them. The rest stayed, and Mile 9 spent that day doing what refugee camps do better than any army I ever fed, which is prepare without pretending. The shelter trenches went a half-meter deeper. The water barrels were filled and lidded. Hannick walked the cemetery fence and then came to the kitchen tent and asked me, gruff as gravel, what a dragon war matriarch might count as a courtesy from a man with nothing, in case there was time for courtesy before the burning started, and I had no answer. And he went away and spent the evening sweeping the assembly ground clean with a yard broom 70 years old, sweeping a dirt parade square for the sky's arrival. And if you do not understand why that broke me to watch, then I have told this story badly. Kavash came to the wire at full dark, the first time he had ever come so near the camp, and the people did not scatter. That is the detail history will want. They came out of the tents and stood in lines along the inside of the wire in the cold, 1,100 of them, looking at the thing they had been feeding all winter without knowing it. And he stood looking back, and nobody spoke. And then old Senna Marsh lifted her lamp so the light reached him better. And one by one down the wire the lamps came up. A camp's worth of small lights raised to see a dragon by, and he bowed his head to them the way he had gone down in the mud for Hannock, all the way down, and held it down. And there are 200 witnesses who swear the ground hummed with something too low to hear. And that is how the last morning found us. The host drawing its squares smaller out of the eastern sky, the column grinding up from the south with its paid-for map, 1,100 souls between, and one old cook standing in a kitchen tent before dawn, holding a heart scale in 7 words, thinking, God help me, this is the truth in the whole of my generalship, that whatever else the day brought, the line would want feeding at 6. And the beans had been soaking since midnight, and a camp meets terror better with something hot in it. So I tied my apron and lit the burners, and the last ordinary morning of the old world at mile 9 began with the smell of soup, the way every morning had since the war, the way I intended every morning to go on doing, whatever was coming over the ridge. They both came on the same morning. Of course they did. The whole story had been building to a bad piece of timing, and the veil never once let me down. The host came out of the sunrise, which I have since been told is doctrine and was no accident. You come at a thing with the light behind you and the dark in its eyes. I was at the kettle with the first 100 of the breakfast line strung out across the assembly ground when the east went strange, not dark, the opposite, a hard glitter all along the ridge as the low sun came off 10,000 square meters of moving scale. And then the sound arrived. And the sound is the thing no book had readied me for, not roaring wings. Hundreds of wings in formation make a sound like the sky being slowly torn along a seam, and it goes through a crowd of war refugees like current through water. The line broke. Of course it broke. Every soul on that ground had stood under that sound 18 months ago, while everything they owned burned, and they scattered for the tents and the trench shelters with the wordless speed of the already burned, mothers folding over children mid-stride, and I will never hold 1 second of it against any of them. I stood at the kettle with my ladle in the air and my heart going like a stove rattle, and I made the only command decision of my career. I kept ladling. There was nobody in front of me to serve. I filled bowls and set them in a row along the serving board, 1, 2, 3, against all reason, because the line would reform when the world allowed, and the soup would want to be ready when it did, and because, I will say it honestly, the apron and the ladle were the whole of my armor and the only flag I had, and how you are found is a language. If the sky was coming to read mile 9, it would read one thing standing. The food, still hot, still being served. And then Kabash came past me and took up his post. He had left the shed in the night. He told me afterward he had felt the formation lift from the staging bluffs 80 kilometers east the moment it took the air. He came through the camp at a walk while the people scattered around his legs, lame shoulder and all. Head low so the tent lines could pass, the silver brush scale of him throwing back the sunrise, and he put himself between the camp and the east with his ruined wing toward the soup tent, and his good wing flared out over the serving ground like a roof beam, the widest thing for a mile, impossible to miss, impossible to misread. He did not crouch to fight. He did not raise his crest. He planted his 4 feet around the wellhead and the kettle line around me. I came up to the middle joint of his foreleg and could have touched it with my ladle. And he set his head high and held his ground scale steady, and out of him came a sound I had never heard. A long carrying tone like a struck bell that went rolling out across the flats to meet the wings. 3 rising notes, repeated. What are you telling them? I called up. Sanctuary ground, the gravel came down. Wards within. It is the oldest claim there is. It will not stop them. But every wing that crosses it knowingly will carry the crossing forever, and they will know it from a kilometer out, and the knowing slows old soldiers. The gold eye angled down at me, and the next words were almost gentle. Get under my chest, Tobias. I'm minding the soup, I said, out of my mind entirely. I know, he said. So stand by your kettle and mind it, and I will stand over the kettle and the cook, each to his post. It has been an honor to soldier with you. They did not land like a flock of anything. They landed like an occupation. A first ring of war wings touching down 400 meters out, all around the camp simultaneously, the ground coming up through my boot soles with the multiple shock, dust walking inward on the displaced air until it broke against the tents. Then a second ring inside it, and sky scouts dropping to the bluffs and the water tower and the cemetery rise, every high point holstered with a dragon in the space of 30 breaths. 200 wings, Edda counted later, because Edda counted even then. The breath of them hazed the morning. Not one made a sound once down. That was the worst of it. That trained silence. 200 war dragons standing in the sunrise waiting at perfect parade rest, and the only noises on Hollis' verge were a child crying somewhere in the tents and my soup at the simmer and the bell tone of a lame champion claiming sanctuary over a refugee camp with nothing left to back the claim but his body. She came in last, alone, over the eastern ring and straight down the morning, and there was no mistaking her for anything but what she was. Sevozara, war matriarch of the Syndral host. She was half again Kavash's length, charcoal black, with ember-colored ridging down the crest and along the wing, bones as if she had been quenched but never quite cooled. And the age on her was visible the way age is visible on a mountain face, not weakness, stratification. She landed 40 meters in front of Kavash with a control that did not even fold the steam off my kettle, and the two of them looked at each other across the assembly ground of Mile 9, the matriarch and the champion she had keened for dead, while 200 wings held their silence and an old man's beans climbed slowly toward a boil. When she spoke, the trade tongue out of her was nothing like his gravel. It was vast and slow and burred at the edges, a glacier speaking, and it carried to every tent in the camp without effort, which I understood was the point. They sang your death at the high cold, Kavash that was. I set the first stone of your cairn with my own foot. The cairn stands empty, and the law stands full, and between the empty thing and the full thing, you will tell me now which one lied. Neither, matriarch. His voice did not bend. The champion died in the riverbed. The law was satisfied. What stands before you is what your fire left over, and it has no name you are owed, and it claims sanctuary ground for the small ones at its back, who took in a nameless broken thing and never once asked what it had been. A nameless broken thing. The great ember-ridged head moved, taking in the camp the way the law looks. The patched tents, the trench shelters with white faces in them, the wellhead, the kettle, me, whose wounds are dressed with the wax cord of shipmenders, whose scale is curried bright, who stands fed and healed on sanctuary he did not have the strength to claim a season ago. The eye came back to Kavash, and the burr in the voice dropped lower, and the temperature of the whole morning dropped with it. The scouts said kept. I flew here on the word kept, prepared to burn what keeps a champion of mine like a yard beast. I find the lost one standing guard over a soup line. So now the host must learn what was done to him and by whom, and the learning will be exact, and what the learning finds, the law will answer. Stand aside from the small ones, Kavash that was. The reading of this ground will be mine. And the dragons of the inner ring moved, not a charge. A tightening, 200 bodies taking one deliberate step inward with the morning sun running along them, the whole horizon of the camp contracting like a throat, and somewhere behind me in the tents a wail went up, and Kavash's good wing came down lower over the serving ground, and his weight shifted onto the ruined shoulder to brace, and I saw the next 10 minutes with terrible clarity, the reading, the law, the old blind machine grinding over everything soft in its path, with every soul I had cooked for 2 years standing under it. So I wiped my hands on my apron, and I stepped out from under the wing, and I walked out in front of the matriarch of the Syndral host, with a flour sack bundle in one hand and my ladle still in the other, because I had forgotten I was holding it. 40 meters of open ground between her and me, and I crossed all of it at the pace I crossed my kitchen, because my legs only knew the one speed, and the gold furnace eyes of 200 war wings tracked me the whole way. And behind me I heard Kavash say my name once, low, like a man watching the pot go over and too far away to catch it. I stopped where I judged her shadow began. I unwound the flour sacking, and I held the heart scale up over my head into the sunrise, gray going to bronze, the unburned vow mark catching the light clean, and the inner ring stopped as if it had marched into a wall. 200 dragons going from motion to stone between one wing beat and the next. I said the 7 words. I said them the way he taught me, loud, my voice cracking on the 5th like a boy's, and I will not write them here, but the veil knows what they mean now, and so do I all the way down. The vow is kept where it fell, and the minute he had bought me began. The matriarch's head came down out of the sky toward me, slow as a crane lowering, until the eye, older than the colony, older than the human presence on that world, an ember the size of a cartwheel banked under a charcoal brow, hung level with my face, and the heat of her breath came around me, and the glacier voice came out at a register I felt in my breastbone more than heard. You hold a champion's breast scale, small one. Given, not taken, it cannot be taken, the body knows the difference and so does the law. Given once, and to one. The eye narrowed, and the morning seemed to narrow with it. He had 1,000 wings to choose among, and 60 years of war brothers, and he gave the one ungovernable thing he had left to a ground person in an apron. So the law must look at you now, looker after of pots. The law is looking. 1 minute. Tell the host what you are. 200 dragons, 1,100 humans in the trenches and the tents at my back. The beans, somewhere behind me, coming up to the boil exactly as the recipe asks, and I promise you that under that eye, with the whole morning stopped around me like held breath, Some quartermaster's corner of my mind made a note about the beans. I lowered the scale and held it against my chest, where it had come from on him, and I told her, "I'm the cook," I said. "Tobias Realm. I run the kitchen here. That's the whole rank and the whole record, and I'll spend my minute on it, since you've asked what I am and the answer's short. I feed people. 1,100 of them, twice a day, out of that kettle behind me, and they're only here at all because your war went through their valley like a kitchen fire through a grease trap, and you should know none of them ever raised a hand back, because there was no hand to raise that your people would so much as feel. And 100 and some days ago your dead champion fetched up in our storm drain, starved down to the frame, wing and rags, and I found him on the slop run and I fed him. That's it. That's the crime your laws come to read. I tipped a barrow of kitchen waste to a starving animal in a ditch, and then I kept doing it, and then some others helped, and a girl traded her dead mother's ring for his medicine, and an old man whose son your war buried hauled him grain in a barrow, and a sailmaker sewed his wing with her own cord and wax, and not one of us ever learned his name until long after, and not one of us fed him because of what he was. We fed him because he was hungry. That's the entire conspiracy, matriarch. You're standing on it. It's called a refugee camp, and the people in it know the one thing your law doesn't seem to, which is that what something is matters a great deal less than what it needs. The eye did not blink. The minute burned. Behind me I could hear the camp in its trenches, perfectly silent now. 1,100 people listening to their cook spend his last words like a drunk sailor, and I found I was not finished. And as for what was done to him and by whom, you want the reading exact, so here it is, exact. We did to him what he did on the river road. The last night of your burning, your champion looked down at 2,000 of these people spilled along a dark road, and your law was in one ear, and he broke it and took fire across the wings so a column of strangers' children could reach the crossing. 11 towns too late, he says, and carries it like a stone. Maybe so, I can't weigh that. But the daughter of one of the men standing behind me came down that road, and her girls and half the camp besides, and they have spent a winter feeding the wing that burned for them without ever knowing it was him. And if your law can read tent canvas in a wound, matriarch, then let it read that. The vow you burned off his cheek with a crosswise stroke, these people stitched it back into him with sail thread, and they didn't even know they were doing it. They were just feeding what was starving and sorting the politics after. So go on and learn this ground exact. We'll stand for the learning. But I'll tell you what the learning's going to find, top to bottom, because I provisioned every kilo of it. Soup, mostly. It's going to find soup. The minute ended. I knew it ended because the matriarch lifted her head away from me, slow back up into the sky where heads like hers live, and the morning came rushing back into the space it left. Cold air and kettle steam and somewhere a child still crying, and she looked out over my head at the camp for a long time, at the trenches, at the patched tents, at Hannock, who had come out of the shelter line and stood at the cemetery fence with his cap in his hands, at his own grave, 70-some years old, in plain sight of 200 war wings, daring the sky to make him move again, at Pia, who had her brother's hand in one fist and the serving board's edge in the other, holding the bowls down against the wing wind, because somebody had to, at Edda by the office tent with her slate hugged to her chest, counting dragons, Kavash. The glacier voice had changed register, and the whole host shifted at the sound of the name said clean unburdened of that was. The road column, the night of the East Bank line. Why did you never speak it at the vow court's hearing of your death? Dorhetz gave them silence in a riverbed. You could have given them this. There was no court I was alive to speak at, matriarch, he said. And had there been, I would not have spent these people in it. The law would have asked what they were to me. The honest answer was a road in the dark. The law has never had a place to put that. No, she said slowly, it has not. And then the war matriarch of the Syndral host did the thing that the veil still talks about, and will when I am gone and Pia is old. She turned from her champion and her law, walked 3 strides across the assembly ground, each footfall coming up through my boots, and lowered her great charcoal head over the serving board where the row of filled bowls stood going cold in the wing wind, and looked at them, just looked, the way the law looks, at 6 bowls of barley soup ladled out into the teeth of an arriving army by a man with nobody left in his line. The ember eye hung over my morning's work for the better part of 10 breaths. 200 dragons watched her do it. Then the head rose, and she spoke the way she had first spoken, vast and carrying, to every wing on the ground and every soul in the trenches at once. The host came to burn a shame. The ground holds no shame. The ground holds a vow kept past the breaking of the one who carried it, kept by hands that never swore it, in a tongue that has no word for it, out of a kettle. A sound moved through 200 dragons then, low and rolling, wing bones easing, breath let go together, and it was not a cheer and was better than one. Hear the finding. The fire this host owes the veil is not the kind it knows how to give. The debt stands. The reading is finished. That was when the garrison arrived, because the Vale never once let me down. They came up the south road with the dust standing off them a mile high, the armor column out of Verge City, 6 crawlers and air support already audible behind the ridge, arriving with a paid-for map to destroy 1 feral draconiform and finding 200 and one of them arranged around the objective in parade order. The column stopped 800 meters out in the open, which I am told is what their doctrine says, and what their doctrine said after that I never learned because nothing about that morning was in anybody's doctrine. I have heard the recording of the column commander's first transmission back to Verge City. Everyone on Hollis Verge has heard it by now. The man's voice is admirably level, and what he says is, cancel fire mission, cancel everything, get me the governor's office, and tell them to wake whoever signs treaties. What saved that second hour was the same thing that saved the first, how we were found. The matriarch put the host's wings down flat, 200 dragons folding to ground rest in a single motion, the least threatening shape a host can take, which is still a sight that loosens the knees, and Etta Voss walked out the south wire with the camp, rolls under her arm to meet the column the way she met all audits. And between an old depot clerk and a war matriarch, with 1 column commander sweating in the middle, the Vale got the morning's second miracle, which took the shape of paperwork. A standstill, witness both sides. A camp suddenly worth more intact than any map had ever marked it, because it was the one patch of Hollis Verge where the Syndrel host had voluntarily grounded, and the one name both signatures would sit under was Mile 9. The rest is the part nobody believes happens after stories like this, the long, dull, blessed administrative tale, and I lived it, so I will swear to it. The host did not leave. Honor wings rotated in from the east in 4s and 6s, and they worked. Reparation, the matriarch called it, and dragon reparation is not coin. It is 60-meter timbers walked down from the high forest like a man. Carries kindling. It is a water channel redug from the river in an afternoon by talons that could thread a needle. It is the burned shell of Carverton swept clean of wreckage in 9 days, the cemetery walled in quarried stone by Wings who asked Hannock, through Kavash, where each course should lie, and set it where the old man pointed. The colonial office sent treaty people, and the treaty people found, to their visible bewilderment, that the indispensable parties to the first human Syndrel Accord on Hollis Verge were a camp warden, a miller, a 17-year-old girl who corrected the survey maps, and a cook who kept excusing himself because the line formed at 6. Kavash stayed. There was a day I had dreaded when the matriarch's own wing surgeons came and looked long at the ruined wing, and the oldest of them said in trade tongue what Saul had said in the shed doorway for free, he will not fly. And Sev Ozera stood over her champion in the new spring light and offered him the high cold anyway, a place at the vow court, honor unmade and remade, his cairn pulled down with ceremony, his name sung back among the living. Carried home if he could not fly there. The whole camp held its breath for a week. He came to the kitchen tent at the end of it, in the dark, the way it all started, and stood while I worked the morning's first stock and said, I told her the post is filled, I hold ground here. Sanctuary ward of Mile 9, by the host's own finding, the first dragon of this people ever to hold a human ground as his vow ground. The gravel went quiet a moment. A small names keep, I had it on good authority, so he is out there now. It is 2 years on as I set this down. Mile 9 has streets, and the streets have names, and the camp office is a town hall with a treaty under glass in it, and the soup line is a proper mess hall, though it still runs out of my same kettles, because some instruments are proven, and you do not retire them. The wall of the mess hall facing east has no window glass in the lower third of it. That is not poor planning. That is so ahead the length of my old serving counter can come in out of the weather and lie along the floor seam of an evening, while the children of people who once scattered at the sound of wings climb over the notch crest like it, is municipal equipment, which, legally, I am told it now is. The vow mark is back on his cheek. The matriarch set it there herself at midsummer before 1,000 wings over the Vale, the only time I ever saw him afraid. And there is a new mark beside it that the host had to invent, a small one, shaped like nothing any dragon law had ever needed a shape for before. A kettle. I am informed by Pia, who is learning their high tongue faster than their scholars can teach it, that the host's young have already turned it into a saying, and that the saying is spreading east through the clans the way warmth spreads in a cold room, and that roughly rendered it goes, judge a people by what they do with their leavings. They gave me a name too at midsummer. I had no say in it. Keth Aaron, the matriarch pronounced over my head while I stood there in my good apron, wishing I could check on the kettle. Hearth that does not ask. The whole host says it now when they come through, 200 tongues of gravel and glacier, saying the hearth that does not ask to a man whose knees complain on the cold mornings, and I answer to it. because you answer when you're called, but between us, it has always seemed to me a fancy way of writing down a plain recipe, and I would have settled for the recipe. Feed what is starving. Sort the politics after. It has not failed me once in 63 years, and it built the piece of an entire world out of a tipped slop barrow, and still, every morning at 6, the line forms and I am at the kettle, and the great gold eye opens at the east wall to watch the first ladle go out. Some mornings, when the steam comes up and the light comes through and the line is long and loud and alive, the furnace sound rolls out of him so low that only I can hear it, the sound of a thing fed past its number, and I choose to believe it means what I chose the first night. At my age, you are allowed to choose what things mean. I chose that midnight at the lip of the cut with 60 liters of slop and no sense at all. I would tip that barrow again every night God grants me. It was the best meal I ever served, and I have served a few, and the secret of it is the same secret as all the others. It was hot, it was honest, and nobody who came hungry was asked a single question first.